Hello, Advocacy for Change folks. As you can see, I'm the guy that's going to be giving you a pep talk to get you started off here, get the juices going. My name's Lynn Breedlove. I was the executive director of Disability Rights Wisconsin for a long time, and I was also the co-chair of the Survival Coalition, which is the big cross-disability coalition that does a lot of work in the legislature on behalf of people with disabilities. So I want to talk to you about social change and the fact that you folks are the change agents. Other people with disabilities, other family members make up the disability movement in Wisconsin, and we happen to be a state that has had a history of a very strong disability movement now for quite a long time. And I think of the disability movement as a civil rights movement. It's a movement to help people with disabilities achieve full citizenship, rich lives, real inclusion in school and in their home communities and the workplace. And to me, it's a very exciting movement. And one of the reasons it's exciting is that I'm old enough to have seen a lot of progress and advances in the last 20, 30 years in terms of the life circumstances for people with disabilities and the services for people with disabilities. And you can see, even in the last few years, we've had some really big steps forward, and they were hard-fought victories by disability advocates, including increases in school funding, increases in Medicaid personal care program, which a lot of children and adults rely on. We got some big increases in funding for specialized transportation, and we've ended waiting lists for long-term care for adults, and we're marching towards ending waiting lists for kids as well, which is pretty exciting. So this is, whether or not this is a state budget session year or it isn't, I just want to tell you a little bit about state budget, because that happens every 2 years in Wisconsin, and it's a big deal. There's always a lot of money that gets spent on something. It might get spent on disability services, it might not, and a lot of that depends on you and other advocates and what you guys do in the legislature during that time. But in the left column would be some of the opportunities that we often see. Sometimes the governor will put some good stuff in his proposed budget, and we're going to want to fight for it. Sometimes there'll be a state surplus or a Medicaid surplus, and that means there's some money that is ready to be spent, and there's going to be some competition for who's going to get that money. And we want to make sure we're at the table and making a case for disability services at that time. On the right-hand side, sometimes you're going into the state budget and it's more of a gloomy prospect. The experts are saying, oh, there's going to be a state deficit. We're going to have to cut the budget, or we're not sure what state revenues, tax revenues are going to look like. So maybe there's going to be a deficit. Maybe we'll have to cut some services. Lots of times the nursing home industry is looking for big increases, and they want to get the lion's share of whatever funding there is for human services. It's not uncommon that we hear rumors of cuts to Medicaid programs. So disability advocates are going to have to go into the legislature and remind legislators how important Medicaid is, and programs like the Children's Long-Term Support Program that's Medicaid funded, and programs like Family Care and IRIS. So those things are things that happen relatively often. But regardless of the situation, it's really important to remember that just about every time something good happens for people with disabilities, it's because families and parents in particular have fought hard for that funding increase, or to get that new program created, or to fight off the danger of a cut. And in recent years, actually, people with disabilities have joined forces with families so that it's now a team effort. And we have lots of examples of, a couple parents setting up a meeting with a legislator and one or two adults with disabilities go along with them. They're all constituents of that legislator, and that can be a really powerful combination when that happens. So what does this mean for you? What it means is, if there's something you'd like to see happen in this legislative session or in the state budget, you can't really wait for somebody else to make it happen. You can't assume the statewide advocacy organizations are going to make it happen. It's probably going to happen because you and other parents and some people with disabilities have taken the time to set up meetings with your own legislators and go in and explain to them why this is important and ask them for their vote. There's no substitute for that. And a lot of us who've worked in the legislature for a long time know that the people that legislators will sit up and take notice to are the people who are constituents in their district. If they know you're someone who could vote for them or vote for their opponent, they're generally going to be interested in hearing what you have on your mind. And if possible, they're going to try to make you happy by supporting the issue that you're working on. And it's good to remember that you're not starting from scratch here. There are people in the last 50 years in particular in Wisconsin and in the United States who have really fought hard and have won some really important victories. They've planted trees for you, whether that was getting the Americans with Disabilities Act passed or getting IDEA passed, which ensured that every child with a disability would always have a right to a public education, whether it was getting Northern Wisconsin Center closed or getting other institutions closed so that people with disabilities could move out and live in the community, advocacy to make it possible for people to get real jobs in the community. It wasn't that long ago that everybody who graduated from high school with a developmental disability just automatically went into a sheltered workshop. Supported employment programs and integrated employment, that's actually a fairly recent idea, but people had to fight hard to get funding for that. So hopefully you guys are going to plant some trees, which are going to create some shade for people 10, 20, 30 years from now. That's the way it's worked in the disability movement so far, and that's the way we hope it will continue. So I want to encourage you to have dreams, to have visions of what's possible for your son and daughter, and that they would be bold dreams. And I think those dreams and visions are actually the source of energy for you as an advocate. When you go talk to a legislator, you can talk about those dreams. You can talk about what you aspire to happen for your child in school or when they get out of school. And that's often what's going to be the self-fulfilling prophecy. I've done a lot of training and partners in policymaking with self-advocates, and lots of times I'll ask them when they're 20s, well, why is it you believed you could be successful in college? Or why is it you believed you could get a job and make more than the minimum wage and have a job that you really liked? And invariably, what so many of them will say is, well, my parents believed it was possible. And they kept talking about it. They kept talking about, well, when you graduate and you got a job, and I just believed that was possible. And that's what it turned out to be. The other thing is, it's really important for you to be clear about what you believe in. What are your values? It's not enough to just go to a legislator and say, I want to make things better for kids with disabilities. Well, what does better mean? You need to be clear in your own head what better means and actually be able to explain that to somebody else. So your values could be your beliefs about who people with disabilities are. Like, are they people that should just be on the receiving end of charity, or are they people who are citizens? and have a rightful place in their community with fellow citizens. What are your beliefs about what people are capable of? I mean, do you think your child can be successful in a regular classroom? Do you think your son or daughter could eventually hold down a job? What kind of lives do you think people with disabilities aspire to have? And what do you think is important to people with disabilities? And what kind of support do you think will be most valuable to them? And how do you think staff should relate to them? And who should make decisions about their lives? And of course, children with disabilities may have limitations on how much decision-making they can make at this stage of their life. But if you believe their decision-making capabilities can grow as they grow, eventually they may be in a position to say, I'd rather live in that neighborhood than this other neighborhood. Or I'd rather have that kind of job than this kind of job. Or yes, I do want to go on to technical college and learn things that I could learn there. And even people who have limited capacity to make decisions, they can still tell us what their preferences are. But the question is, do you believe that? And if so, those might be things that are important to talk to legislators about, not just what you want them to vote for, but also what you believe in. So these are some of the kinds of things that you might talk to a legislator about and explain why that's important to you, and then link that to why this particular program or this particular dollar item in the budget is important. Is because it could increase school inclusion. It's because it could help people get a job. It could help people be more independent. You probably hear about this from other people in this training, but it's very important to be bipartisan. Our disability movement has been successful because it's not the property of either political party. And in Wisconsin, we have found many friends of disability services among Democrats and Republicans. So when you meet with a legislator, it doesn't matter what his or her party is. You're there to talk about people with disabilities, your family, your son or daughter, the program that you care about. And it's not a Democratic program. It's not a Republican program. It's a program that makes really good sense. And that's why you're asking the person to support it. So you're going to hear more today about effective legislative advocacy. I'll just give you a little head start on that. Think about it as building relationships with legislators and their staff, not just a quick drive-by. Be clear about what you're asking for, be bold, listen carefully. The legislator may be telling you something very important when, she says, well, I had some other constituents come in here and they didn't think this was such a good idea. Well, you want to listen carefully. What is it those people said? Is it something you can respond to? And if they ask you questions, don't be intimidated. Don't be defensive. If you know the answer, great. If you don't, say, hey, good question. I'll find out. I'll get back to you. Be persistent. They'll often tell you, thanks for coming in. We'll think about it. And you can ask the staffer, well, can I call you back in a week and find out what you decided, if you're going to support this bill or you're not going to support the bill? And of course, you always want to say thanks. And if some legislator votes for your bill and the bill doesn't pass, that legislator still deserves a thank you from you. This is what we've been told. Your voices count more than the voices of lobbyists. Your stories are what get bills passed. Your legislator really wants to know what your concerns are. You got to believe this, because it's true, and it's the sort of thing that will convince you it's worth the effort to go in there and talk to legislators. And remember, you're not just speaking for yourself or for your child. You're speaking on behalf of other families with kids with disabilities. Some of them may not be able to attend this training. Some of them may not be able to drive to Madison when it's safe after COVID to meet face to face. But there's some people who can do that, and they become the voices for the people who can't do it. And lastly, you're going to hear some no's. you're going to speak to some legislators about spending or a bill, and they're going to say, no, I don't think so, or that's not a priority for me. And that's where one of my heroes, Val Phillips, one of the great civil rights leaders in Wisconsin, when I heard her talk and she said, every no is one step closer to a yes, that became a mantra for me in the legislature. And I think it's inspired many other people too. So don't forget to think about this as a process. You got to keep at it if ultimately you're going to accomplish something. So that's my pep talk. Good luck in your contacts with legislators, and have a good rest of your training.